Welcome to the Transformative Principal podcast, where we learn how to be an amazing educational leader. I am your host, Jethro Jones. Are you ready to be a transformative principal? I'm looking for about 10 people who are ready to do what it takes to lead with integrity, find balance, and take your school to the next level. If you're looking to improve your leadership in a measurable way, go to transformativeprincipal.org/mastermind to see if you qualify to join a group of like-minded people who are ready to be the best principals in the country. Welcome to Transformative Principal, episode 194. I am really excited to have a duo on here. Rick Jetter and Rebecca Coda are authors of a book called Escaping the School Leader's Dunk Tank, and I think you're really going to enjoy listening to their story and learning about how it feels when people are trying to sabotage you. Really good stuff. It's one of the conversations that I like to have on this podcast because we don't talk about it very much in education, and we kind of just ignore it until it happens, and then nobody knows what in the world they're supposed to do when it does happen. So the first part of it, we're going to talk about how to identify it. And then the second part of it, we're going to talk about what you can do to make it happen. So enjoy this conversation with Rebecca and Rick. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am so excited to have Rick Jetter and Rebecca Coda on the podcast today. They are the authors of a great book called How to Escape the Dunk Tank, the School Leaders. No, gosh, I messed that all up. All right, we're going to start over. No, we're not going to start over. I'm going to get the title right, though. Escaping the School Leader's Dunk Tank, How to Prevail When Others Want to See You Drown. So, Rick and Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the Transformative Principal podcast today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Jethro, thanks, dude. Always a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you guys because as I have said many times on this podcast and in talking with you already, I mentioned that these are the kinds of things what we're going to talk about today are the kinds of things that nobody prepares you for. So if you don't mind, before we get started, Rebecca, just talk a little bit about your background, what you've done professionally and what led you to write this book, and then we'll turn it over to Rick to continue after that.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I've taught grades 4 through 7, and I taught about 7 years, and then I moved into instructional coaching. And then I moved on to the district level in as a curriculum specialist in ELA, and then into a district role as a district technology specialist. And it's interesting because that shift from building leadership to district leadership, the culture really changed. And I knew that when I got there, but I thought I just had to learn the game. So I kept, working it, trying to do what's right, trying to do good work. But as the years progressed there, things just kind of came to a head, especially with just adversarial tactics, nepotism, people working from the inside, people working in silos, and it just kind of came to a head where I knew it wasn't a place I could work any longer. And then, at that point, I kind of connected with Rick, and we kind of hit it off and had similar stories, and, it kind of was where the book was born.
Cool. Thanks. And Rick?
Yeah, real quick. I've held every position in K through 12 education for the past 17, 18 years. Dunked myself and got dunked by others, and moved into a field outside of the public school realm where I'm a director of K through 12 education for a company in Buffalo, New York, which is very similar to Scholastic or BookSource, and I'm their director of education. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to start writing a lot of stuff, and then those turned into publications and turned into an incredible PLN, including Rebecca, who is really, I kind of see her as my other half in the publishing and educational industry. And we're basically forging a lot of projects together to help others do the very best that they can in K through 12 schools. So, yeah, it's like, when things go sour, how do you rebuild yourself and do your best to help others and contribute to the field? So I'm really in a good spot. I'm happy. I'm sober, I'm humbled, and really honored to speak with you today.
Well, that's fantastic. And, I like what you said there at the end, that sometimes you do need to rebuild yourself and come off of these what can be traumatic experiences. So let's talk a little bit about what that means when you say the dunk tank and how people are trying to, when they want to see you drown. What does that actually look like? What are some clues that we can get? Because it's easy to think that is the case and say, woe is me and poor me, that people don't like me and whatever. How do you know when it's really somebody's trying to sabotage you and when it's just not that? It's just people disagreeing.
I think once you start compromising your own beliefs, no matter how small it is, because you think you have to fit in or you think you have to please, and you choose not to do the right thing because you want to fit in with your organization, and you have what we call in the book proactive paranoia. It's that inner voice where it's not right. You can't quite pinpoint it. You don't have enough information to put all the pieces together. And that feeling might even just blaze by and you don't grab that. So with the dunk tank, we really hone in on, you got to listen to that voice when it comes by, because your intuition is typically right on. So when you notice behaviors, things, even the smallest things like, clicks, whispering, or it could be something as big as sabotage, where you're all of a sudden given 10 projects and you're already working 14-hour days and you can't do them, but you were given the project so that you would fail. It can range anywhere in between there.
So there are things where, there are high expectations for school leaders, and I think rightfully so. You've got a lot of responsibility. Isn't that just like part of the job, is having high expectations, and there's a lot that you need to do? So how do you really distinguish that? Besides that, you started talking about that proactive paranoia. Tell me a little bit more about how we figure that out, and what you mean when you say that voice is telling you that that's not the right thing to do.
It really does, honestly, at the end of the day, come down to relationships. If you've had a very amicable, professional working relationship with somebody, and then all of a sudden you notice the behavior of people around you change, you notice things showing up on your calendar, or you notice, emergency meetings, or you notice you're not included or you're excluded from certain things, and just like the example with the work being poured on, sometimes it's not because it's a high expectation and the job needs to get done when other people are leaving early and it's inequitable at work, and people are not teaming to support like normal, that you can just kind of sense and feel when things have changed, when relationships change, like the whole dynamic and culture of, where you are.
Yeah, Jethro, if I could chime in real quick.
Please.
So in chapter 2 of our book, we go through the emotional triggers, or these driving forces that cause people to act adversarial, which then we get into chapter 3 about, and their different tactics. So we go through, right, all the human emotions within an organization and that which we might feel, such as fear, jealousy, anxiety, all these different things we analyze in our book. And then when we jump to chapter 3 and we talk about the actual tactics that people use against us, right, we start to analyze those. And then when people leave the end of our book, they learn how to prevail, learn how to identify with all these emotional triggers and adversarial tactics that were discussed earlier in the book. And they walk away with like this tool chest, like, wow, you know what? I can explicitly confront these things in my organization when I see them pop up, and we're going to move forward together versus hiding ourselves behind a tree or an elephant that would, that we're not going to address. So we really break down things into very small pieces, and we start with the emotional triggers that lead to adversity, that lead to non-productivity, right? And rob our students and our staff from moving forward. So we really break all these things down into small chunks, and we create these building blocks for people to walk away equipped.
Yeah, I think walking away equipped is a powerful piece there. So let's dig in a little bit to the emotional triggers and then talk about tactics. And then what I really want to get into is how do we prevail even when these things are happening. So let's start with some emotional triggers that you would start noticing if people are trying to sabotage you.
Well, we really identify those. They're kind of two different things. We've got the emotional driving forces. So when somebody is jealous, or when somebody is skeptical, or even when there's discrimination, or somebody is being held accountable, or they have fear, what that leads to then are those tactics. And so some of those things that you could really easily pick up on, the rumor mill. So rumors start trickling around that just aren't true. And those are hard to stop because once they start, it's hard to undo what somebody's initial belief was. Sometimes people are just trying to slow down the organization. They give you a project, a task to do, you do it. And then they're like, no, it's not quite right. I want you to redo it a different way. Let's do it again. So sometimes it's intentionally slowing down the organization to pile up the work. Sometimes it's misinformation or leaving out, like intentionally omitting information and leaving people out of the loop. So we identify 10 specific adversarial tactics that are kind of, we talk about launching the ball towards the dunk tank target. That's your ammunition. Those driving forces are really what are triggering these adversarial tactics.
Gotcha. So I had a supervisor that after about a year and a half, someone not working for the district but connected to the district told me that she was, what was the word that was used, intimidated or threatened, that she was threatened by me because of my success. And when he told me that, then what I started to find were ways that she was doing that. And so one of the things that she did is she would give me very broad, non-specific tasks to do. And then what felt to me at the time like micromanaging and saying, well, you didn't do this aspect right. And so you need to redo this and redo that and that. And is that fitting into what one of the tactics that you're talking about?
Absolutely. And that all stems right back to jealousy. So that jealousy then triggered that adversarial tactic of slowing down the organization. And it probably all threads back to ego.
And then Jethro, that leads back to the fact that we don't want others to think that we're not experts, right? So there's that inadequacy piece where, well, wait a second, I'm really good at what I do, and I don't want other people to think that I'm not good at what I do, so I might cover up whatever it is that I'm inadequate about, or spin something that might affect the organization just so I don't look bad, right? So it's this whole host it's this domino effect of emotions and triggers and tactics that are used. And we analyze that, and it's just, it's so funny because school leaders who buy our book, they're like, oh my God, I've lived this. And then other people like teachers or parents or anybody who wants an insight into the political system of schooling, they're like, wow, we didn't know this existed. But you know what? It makes sense because those same behaviors take place in my marriage or with when I'm talking with my friends, right? It's this one up or this expert feeling that sometimes people get. And we break all these things down in our book. And we feel that it attributes to not only schooling and the organization of schooling, but really just human interaction in general.
I would definitely agree with that. And I've seen much of that throughout my career where, it's not just happening in the school. That's just human behavior that people are struggling with all over the place. But because we're in schools, we see it in that specific light. And part of what I think makes it so challenging is that we all claim that we're here to do what's right for kids. And those who truly believe that can be altruistic about that and can be focused on that. But then other people who their ego is too big or they're too threatened by other people's success and can't share the success with others, they are certainly not in it for kids, because if they were, then it wouldn't matter who was doing what and who was being successful. We'd be celebrating everyone's success. So, that aspect of it is is one thing that's really hard for me to deal with, because I feel like we are mostly altruistic until we get threatened. Can you help me unpack that a little bit?
I'm going to let you start on that one, Rick.
Well, the part that we need to realize is, okay, are we going to be threatened about it, or are we going to address it? And time again, Rebecca and I get emails, we get phone calls, we get texts through Twitter. We get all these messages from people who say, what do I do? How do I handle this? And there's really only a few choices, right? It's number one, you either ignore it. Number two, you don't address it and you enable it. Or three, you explicitly address it and you move forward, right? And when people kind of think about that, they're like, wow, you want me to address that? And it's like, okay, well, if you don't, are things going to get any worse? Like, really, are things going to get any worse than they are by you ignoring things and letting the system continue forward in the wrong-headed manner that it's in? Or are you going to grab that elephant by the trunk and say, you know what? Here's what's going on in our system. I want to talk about it, and we're not leaving this room until we figure it out. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's not a bad thing half the time, that it's something that empowers people to be a leader and not to cower. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah, it does.
I was going to say that's actually the point in which I failed. Because I was in an organization and we were bringing on a new position, and it was somebody that I knew, and it was somebody that I had groomed and worked really hard alongside. That person grew a lot and was coming into the organization. I just set that person up for success. I made sure they had everything that they needed, as far as supplies, books, and, mentorships, files on the computer. Like, I just gave her everything that she would possibly need to be successful. And within weeks, I saw like a complete 180 in personality. And then all of a sudden, I was out of the picture, and I had discovered she just kind of used me to get to where she wanted to be, and then kind of fell off the wagon and really truly wasn't there for the kids anymore, wasn't there for the right reason. And it felt so personal, and it triggered so many emotions. I just didn't deal with it. And so had I faced that elephant in the room, like we talk about in the book, when it's small, and you work through those emotions and you kind of call it out like it is, those will dwindle and go away and de-escalate. But the more that you avoid and you don't hit those issues head on, they only get bigger and bigger. Until it reaches a point that you kind of can't stand it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing that happened with me is that I'd been with that person for a while and had asked for a letter of recommendation to move on in my career. And I wasn't getting the letter of recommendation. I asked like in Thanksgiving time and just wasn't getting it. And meanwhile, the relationship was changing, and I was getting these additional expectations and the micromanaging and things like that. And I didn't see it in time to do something to save the relationship or anything like that. And so, time just went on. And by the time at the end of January came around and I said, hey, the jobs are posting right now and I need the letter of recommendation, then it was, oh, well, you're not ready, and I don't think that you should be a principal. I think you need to go get some experience someplace else. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, why didn't we have this conversation 6 months ago when you could have been working with me to help me improve? And when you talk about emotions that came up, I was mad. I was depressed. I was embarrassed. I was angry. I was frustrated. I mean, all of that stuff. It was so raw. And even now, as I think about it, I still get fired up about it because it just felt so wrong that I was never told before. And meanwhile, I'm naively going along thinking that everything's just hunky-dory and fine.
Right.
And that was the worst part of it, is I thought everything was good, but it wasn't.
Right.
No, it's a disaster zone.
Yeah.
It's it's a living. I mean, people call me. They're like, "This is a nightmare. I can't believe I want to crawl under the covers."
Yeah, totally. And wasn't that a great episode? Man, I just loved talking to those two, and it gets even better in next week's installment. So please be sure to stay tuned for that one, and we will see you next week on Transformative Principal. But before I go, I do want to ask you to share this with somebody who might be struggling with some people in their schools, because that does happen. You know it. I know it. We all know it. Thanks so much. Transformative Principal is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators by educators. Visit edupodcastnetwork.com for more great podcasts.